I am a 28-year-old female who met my fiancé, Zach, a 28-year-old male, 3 years ago through a dating app. We went out on a few dates, but it sort of fizzled out initially when we realized that we were fundamentally really different people. He was more of a social person and mostly wanted to go to bars and clubs, but I liked a quieter life. No hate against the people who live the party lifestyle, but it just doesn't work for me. Also, he's the heir to his dad's business, so it's not like he has to worry about his career, whereas I did. So I ended up ghosting him after the first few dates. However, we reconnected later when we met again at my friend's birthday party a few months later, and there, we ended up spending all our time together at the party and we left as friends. Soon enough, he asked me out again, and this time I decided to give him a real chance instead of just giving up because of our differences, like I did the first time around, and we ended up getting pretty serious, as you guys must have realized by now. He and I still were very different people, but we did love each other, and I believed that that would be enough for our relationship to work. My only, and quite possibly my biggest issue with his behavior throughout our relationship was that he was never serious enough about anything, and he was a little too relaxed about life. He said that he just liked to go with the flow, but I really think that he just never had to face real problems because he just had everything served to him on a silver platter all his life. Because his parents could afford to. Meanwhile, I'd had to work for everything that I had because my parents were both high school teachers and did their best to raise me, but of course, I wasn't as rich as Zach was, and I don't mind it. My parents did their best, and I'm proud of them, and also myself, because I worked for everything that I have. I'm a dentist, and I lead a nice life, so I have no complaints about how my life turned out. And I'm grateful to my parents for doing their best. Zach obviously had a very different childhood as compared to mine, which I already spoke about, and as much as I'd hate to admit this, up until a few days back, I'm afraid it's true, that his lifestyle has made him lazy and he takes everything for granted. We moved in together 1 year after dating, and I realized that Zach hadn't grown up at all and still believed that playing video games all day, going to the gym occasionally, and partying every weekend was okay. He'd go to work twice a week only if he felt like it. He'd work at home the rest of the week, and sometimes wouldn't even do that. And there were no repercussions for it because, of course, his dad owned the company and nobody could say jack to the boss's son. He was out and out a product of nepotism, and he was proud of it too. He didn't hesitate to play that card at work either and got paid every month for doing practically nothing. His dad was still working, and he'd reassure Zach that no matter what happened, he'd still inherit the business, and for some reason, he was sure that Zach would do a great job of running it as smoothly as he was, even though Zach didn't even bother to show up for work and barely had any real-life experience. I don't think a business degree is as good as experience, but that's just my opinion. I did try to talk to Zach about it a couple of times, but he told me that as long as he got paid, I didn't need to meddle in his professional life. To be fair, he did have a point, because he was bringing home the money, so I couldn't really complain about him not contributing, because he actually was. The only problem was that I knew that he wasn't doing anything to deserve it, and that bugged me a little, but at the end of the day, he was still earning. And I didn't want to fight with him pointlessly, because if his dad was okay with this arrangement and he was okay with this arrangement, then who am I to disagree? So I let it go on and tried my best to ignore their strange working arrangement. My parents were in their early 50s now, so I was trying to support them a little because it was the right thing to do and also because I wanted to. Most importantly, at this point, I could afford to help them out so they could save up for their retirement. Zach and I kept our finances separate, so I didn't think it was important to tell him what I did with my money, since he never told me what he'd do with his. As long as all our bills were paid, I didn't think it mattered what we did with our hard-earned money. At least in my case, it was hard-earned. So anyway, I'd pay off a couple of my parents' bills every month whenever I could, and even though they asked me not to, I'd do it, because I liked knowing that I was helping them out. I didn't think anyone would have a problem with this, but then, a couple of months ago, Zach brought it up with me when he found out that I'd paid my parents' electric bill for the month. My parents had been visiting the day before, and they'd just brought it up conversationally, and I didn't think it was a big deal, but I think Zach didn't feel the same way about it. He told me that I should have discussed this with him first, and then said that now I must ask him before I send any money to my parents. I didn't take that well at all, and we got into a fight over what he said because I don't think I owe anyone an explanation as to what I do with my own money. I worked for it, I earned it, and so nobody else but me gets to decide what I do with it. I've not asked him what he does with his money either and how he spends it, so neither should he have a say in what I do with my money, especially when I'm not even wasting it all on buying my friends drinks at the bar every weekend. And also, as a dentist who works in a really well-known hospital, I can afford to help my parents out, so I didn't appreciate him telling me to ask him before I did whatever I had to do. That was a major fight that we had, and we didn't speak for a few days after that, but then he apologized to me and we made up. A couple of weeks after that, we got engaged and I got super busy with the wedding prep, so I forgot about that argument of ours. It's been 6 months since we got engaged, and we were supposed to get married this week 3 days back. It didn't happen, because the night before we were supposed to get married, Zach came to me with a document and asked for my signature on it. We'd planned to stay separately until the ceremony, so he was about to check into a hotel nearby, leaving me alone at home, and told me that I needed to hurry. He seemed kind of uncomfortable with the whole thing and was trying to rush me through it and get me to sign as soon as I could, but I'm not stupid. I wasn't going to sign anything without knowing what I was getting myself into, and so I read through the document. At first, I'd thought it was a prenup or something, but while reading, I realized that this contract was about something else altogether, and it was a lot more disturbing when I had that realization. It was a contract that said that after I got married, I would not use my money to fund my parents or any other member of my family, and that if I was ever to get pregnant and have children, they were never to be left with my parents unsupervised until they reached the age of 18. It also said that if Zach or my in-laws deemed it necessary, then I might even have to go no contact with my own family. I don't think I still have words to express exactly how I felt at the time when I went through that contract and I could only stare at Zach with an open mouth. I think a brutal prenup would have been less offensive because at least then he would have been trying to protect his own wealth. The contract that he'd drawn up just made it look like my parents were greedy and untrustworthy vultures waiting to pounce at the slightest opportunity to extort money out of me, which was not the case at all. I think I didn't say anything for about a minute after reading that contract and just kept staring at it, trying to make sense of it. Zach tried to explain to me that the reason he and his parents had thought that this was a necessary measure to take was because of the argument regarding my parents' bills that I'd paid. He believed that this could take a really bad turn with time because soon enough his dad was going to retire and he'd be running the business, which meant a significant raise in his income. And he didn't want my parents to think that they were entitled to any sort of monetary help from either of us at any point, and this contract was supposed to make sure of that. The clause about our future children was something he'd added just in case my parents decided to use our kids against us. And the last one was just for worst-case scenarios, but he told me not to worry about that because he hoped that things would never have to come to that at all. He was talking to me as if this was all normal, and he wasn't demanding anything out of the ordinary at all, which was really strange because throughout the course of our relationship, I kept wondering if Zach would ever grow up enough to take anything seriously. And now that he'd finally decided to get serious, the first thing he did was showed me exactly how low his opinion of me and my parents was. I could hardly believe what he was saying, and the way he was asking me to just sign it so casually was disconcerting. I was livid, but instead of throwing it at his face right then, I decided that I was going to wait it out and insult him in a much worse way than he or his parents could even imagine. So I decided to sign it, but I also told him that I wanted to keep that copy with myself for the time being. He was just so thrilled that I'd decided to sign it that he didn't even question me as to why exactly I'd wanted to keep it with me, and just left after that. I didn't fall asleep until really late at night because I couldn't bring myself to accept that the guy I'd loved and tolerated for 3 years actually looked down on me and my parents, and he'd never considered us equals at all. It was all just him pretending that he admired me for working hard and respected my parents for doing their best, but unfortunately, he didn't think we were trustworthy at all, and were just in this for the money. It was ridiculous, of course, because I'd never asked him for money and neither had my parents ever asked me, but I just liked to help them. And as for Zach, he'd never given me as much as a dime, so I don't know what he was so paranoid about. It was disgusting, and my anger and frustration at my decision to stay with Zach despite his refusal to grow up. The entire night I struggled to come to terms with the contract, and I just kept reading it over and over again because there was just no way that Zach and his parents had actually drafted something like this and then believed that it was appropriate to ask me to sign this as if it was just no big deal. To say that I was furious would be an understatement, and I felt like I really had to get my revenge and make sure he and his parents felt just as awful and humiliated as they'd made me feel. So the next day, the day of my wedding, I did everything as I was supposed to and pretended it was all fine. Then, finally, after I'd walked down the aisle and it was my turn to say my vows, I asked my maid of honor for my purse and brought out the contract to read it out. Everyone looked confused and thought that I must have written my vows down, but my almost-in-laws and Zach were the only ones who looked alarmed, because they knew what was coming now. And they'd guessed it right, because instead of saying my vows, I began reading the contract out loud for everyone to hear and went through all the clauses extra carefully, then announced in front of all the guests that this was what Zach had made me sign the previous night. But unfortunately, I was not that in love with him either. And I could finally see him for the man-child that he was and his parents for the privileged douchebags that they were. Then I finally ripped that contract up into tiny little pieces as aggressively as I could and then flung it right at Zach's face. It was very extra and too dramatic for my taste, but it was also really, really satisfying and low-key to watch him back up in surprise and try to spit out one piece of paper that had accidentally ended up in his mouth somehow. As he spluttered and tried to call me back, I grabbed my parents' hands and walked out with them in tow and my head held high. I am not a generally arrogant person, but in that moment I swear I actually felt like the most powerful person alive. I didn't look back to see the chaos that ensued because I got into my parents' car and drove us home, their home, my childhood home. It was a quiet ride home, and none of us said much, but I could hear my mother crying in the back seat and my father trying to shush her. After we got home, I changed into something more comfortable and erased any trace of makeup I had on my face. And only then did I finally sit down with my parents to talk to them about what exactly had happened. But before I could explain, they were the ones who sat me down and told me that they were incredibly proud of me and couldn't believe that they'd raised a daughter like me. Or at least my dad said that. My mother was too busy crying for me to be able to make out her exact words, but she was nodding along, so it's safe to assume she agreed with what my dad said. I was happy that they were proud of me, because honestly, that's all the validation that I needed. It'd been really tough for me to give up on my 3-year relationship, because more than loving him, I was used to having him around and being with him. Zach and I didn't always have a bad relationship all the time, and we'd also shared a really good bond, which is why I stuck around for so long and waited for him to change, but that contract was the last nail in the coffin. I couldn't get married to him after that, knowing that he had no respect for my parents. I didn't even expect him to love them, but respect was the bare minimum, and if he couldn't even offer them that, then we definitely weren't right for each other. I've been staying at my parents' place since then. The evening of my almost wedding day, Zach called me up and cussed me out. But I didn't mind because I knew that I'd humiliated him much worse than anything he able to do to me. So now it really didn't matter how angry he was or how insulted he felt, because that was the intention. I wanted him to feel the way he'd made me feel, and I think I'd succeeded on that front. But the real reason I'm here is because yesterday I received a tearful voice note from my almost mother-in-law, accusing me of making a mockery of her and her family publicly, which was unfair according to her, since the contract that they'd presented had been in private, and if I'd felt that offended by the contract, then I should have just rejected it then and there, instead of taking things so far and being so dramatic. I don't regret what I did, but I feel like she has a point, because had I not gone ahead with my plan, then I could have dealt with the entire situation privately without involving my parents and making them feel conscious about themselves. I got a little carried away with the idea of humiliating Zach and getting back at him that I forgot to take into consideration the more practical side of things, and I think that's why I might have been in the wrong. Am I the a-hole for publicly humiliating my fiancé and walking out of our wedding because his family had come up with an offensive contract against my parents? BMW. Update 1. So, I decided that I wasn't in the wrong at all. I might have been a tad bit impractical and impulsive, but still, that's a far cry from selfish, cruel, and disrespectful, which is what they'd been. I know a lot of people still disagree with what I did and think I'm the bad guy here, but I don't care. I did whatever I thought was appropriate. And honestly, most people here think that I was completely justified in what I did, so clearly people who think I was wrong are in the minority. There's only so much disrespect an individual can take, and I think I'd spent enough time allowing Zach to say and do whatever he wanted to without questioning anything at all. But when it came to me and my parents, I'm not going to stand for this bullcrap at all, and that one fight that we'd had over the electric bill should have been enough for him to realize that. He didn't realize, and that's on him, really. We're still in touch because we're discussing how to split the expenses of the wedding since we have to pay everyone involved, but even that's about to be over in a few days, and honestly, I don't even regret losing the money. I would have lost just a little less if I'd canceled the day before. At least this way I have a cool story to tell people about what I did at my first wedding. Update 2. So it's done now. Zach and I officially paid off the caterers for our wedding, and now all the bills are cleared. He and I have nothing to discuss anymore, so he finally blocked me. I feel relieved but also kind of empty at the same time. I think that's just because I'd spent so many years believing that I loved him and he loved me, that now I no longer know what to do without him. I know I'll find my way out of this as well, but it just feels really weird and numb. I've been riding the high of my dramatic exit and all the "you're so fabulous" texts that I'd been receiving for the past week and a half, but now that that's dying down, I'm finally beginning to process the gravity of what happened, and I must admit, it's not a very nice place to be. Part of me wants him back, and I'm almost ashamed of it, so I'm sharing it with you guys so I feel less lonely since I can't exactly talk about this to anyone I know in person. I could, but it'd feel weird, and I don't want to make anyone feel awkward or uncomfortable. So any advice on how to deal with a heartbreak like mine is welcome. Update 3. Hey people of Reddit. It's been about a month since I walked out of my wedding and I'm doing better now. Last week, I finally went back to our old house to pack my things up. Zach wasn't at home, but a friend of his was and let us in. It felt weird knowing that I wouldn't be coming back there anymore, and that was my last trip to the place I'd called home for so long. My friend and I packed up and left as soon as we could because I didn't want to get emotional and end up crying in front of other people. Zach's friend, who was staying there with him at the time, did hand me a note before I left, though. It was kind of bittersweet, because it was an apology for what he'd done and how he'd treated me, because he'd always known that I'd been even-tempered and shy, so things must have been pretty bad for me to throw a public fit like that. And yes, that was entirely true. But I'm glad he realized his mistake and apologized for it. He also said a couple of other things, like he wanted us to meet again sometime in the future, when both of us would be in a better space, because he thinks that both of us were immature in the course of our relationship and acted like juvenile teens. We cared more about being in a relationship than about each other, and I suppose he's not wrong. But it stung to read all of it and realize that even I'd messed up on some level. I don't think it's likely that we'll ever get back in touch or fall in love with each other again. But it's sweet that he apologized to me. That's really all that I can say, because despite this apology, I still can't change the past and fix our relationship, because the damage is done now. I'm sad that we ended on such a terrible note. But I'm also looking forward to a better life now that I'm single. I'm obviously not going to be dating anyone for quite some time, and focus only on myself and improve myself so that I don't end up making the same mistakes that I made with Zach. I've rented a new apartment near my parents' place so I can just visit them if I feel too lonely. And I've also decided to devote more time to work and also reading, painting, and other hobbies of mine, which I'd forgotten about after I started dating Zach, and then my entire life became about my relationship. But that's going to change now, and I'm looking forward to that change. I don't know what the future holds for me, but I'm glad that I have supportive parents, empathetic friends, and a steady job to keep me sane.